Right, then good evening or hello everybody. This is going to be a short demonstration flight to show you a little bit about the preparation in an Airbus, and then of course to demonstrate how you can recover out of approach phase if you've accidentally enabled approach phase. So to begin with, we're going to enable the batteries. And ground power. Turn on all the fuel pumps and oxygen supplies. And just like in a 737, make sure that the ADIRs or IRS are going to align so that we actually get accurate GPS positioning. Now normally you'd crank up the brightness for all of these displays manually. I'm going to use a shortcut for this. Done. So you can see the IRS alignment is going to take a little bit, 7 minutes. And this is going to be a flight in which I'm not going to use Sim Toolkit Pro or Sim Brief to do any planning. So I'm just going to enter a couple of weights and passenger numbers, fuel, etc. Just a wild guess. So let's say 180 passengers. And let's say 4.3 tons of fuel. Now obviously you can see here 0 fuel weight CG, center of gravity, is a bit forward. Now we don't want that really, at least I don't. I want to use the passenger distribution slider to get as close to 25% as possible, which is the ideal CG. Okay, 25% exactly. Quick refuel. Apply these load settings. So now the next step would be to start with the flight plan. I have not created a flight plan to just simply load. So I'm going to create the flight plan as we move along here. So LEPA is the ICAO code for Palma de Mallorca airport. And we're going from Mallorca to Mallorca. It's a short circuit, 100 miles roundabout. The next step would now be to select Align IRS to make sure that we're actually using the aligned IRS systems. This is the actual flight number and call sign that you would be using if you were communicating with ATC. So in that case it would be Lufthansa 141. And for an A320 or 321, as in this case, the Lufthansa regularly uses a cost index of 30. And we're going to try and reach a flight level of 180. Now back to that previous screen. The zero fuel weight is 66.2 tons. And I don't have to enter the zero fuel weight CG because it is 25% already. If it wasn't, then I'd have to enter the weight slash and whatever value is indicated. .3 tons of fuel. Right, now we are going to want to select the SIDS, etc., runway and so on. And it's going to be runway 24 right. And it's going to be the ESPOR to Alpha departure. With no transition. Insert. Then we're going to enter the arrival, which is also going to be runway 24 right. And I'm going to be choosing the ILS 24 right Zulu approach on the RIXOT 1 Papa. And it is going to be a transition via Charlie Delta Papa. By the way, this information I pre-planned in Navigraph, just so you know, I'm not doing this off the back of my head. Because if you want to plan a flight accurately, you're going to have to do it with accurate navigational data. So the next step would be to have a look if we actually have any discontinuities, and we probably do. So after waypoint ESPOR, we're actually just going direct RIXOT. So in this particular case, we can just clear out the discontinuity by pressing clear, and then the appropriate line selector, and insert. That's all looking good. Decel, by the way, is an interesting point that we're going to be talking about a bit later on. Decel is displayed on the ND as a circle with a capital D in it, and it is the point in which the aircraft would automatically enable approach phase when passing over the point. Now in reality that works too, but in reality you have air traffic control that can, under circumstances, and will quite likely give you vectors to final, meaning you will get directions to fly, and under circumstances you might not pass over the decel point. So be prepared to enable approach phase manually. In reality, every airline has its own set of rules on when to enable approach phase, etc., etc. So when I do it, this is just going to be some kind of rule of thumb, and please don't nail me on it. So the next thing, because we've selected our departure runway, which is 24 right, we now get the option to select the takeoff config, and I'm going to be doing 1 plus F, flaps 1 plus F, that is, slats and flaps. And I could be using flex temperature, which is the Boeing equivalent of a derated takeoff performance. I will not do so. I'm going to use toga thrust and observe how these values change. They don't really change very much. So once we've got these values, we go to the perf section, performance, and then we just enter 140. Same thing for V rotate, the speed at which to pull up. And V2, the speed at which, in case of an engine failure, we need to reach to safely take off. And then the flaps. We need to tell the aircraft what sort of flap configuration, slat and flap configuration we're going to be using or intend to be using. So it's going to be flaps 1 and up 0.7. You can see you have slash separated values. That's why I'm going to use the slash here too. Done. So since I'm not using flex temperature, I'm not going to enter a value because I'm using toga thrust. So that is it from here so far. Now I can do a little bit of preparation already, because I know I'm going to be landing on 24 right again. So one thing I can do is set my range rings. Now what I've done here is I've selected any waypoint except for the arrival, and then you get the option in the Thales Airbus for fix info. So we go in there and now we would, well, I'm going to do this at least, set the reference fix for the runway that I'm going to be landing on. Let's have a quick look at that. So it is LEPA, which is the ICAO for Mallorca, 24 right. And I'm going to set a 10-mile radius. And as you can see here, it just appeared now on the screen because we're at the airport. I'm going to set another one, and unfortunately in the Airbus you have to re-enter the values all the time. Four miles and repeat for 2 miles. So the next thing we're going to do is add exactly that same information in here as well. So we'll know when we're flying how far we are away from the airport. So let us assume, what did I say, we're going to RIXOT. So as we can see here, there is an altitude constraint to fly at this point below flight level 230. We're going to do flight level 180 if I remember correctly. Let's have a quick look. Yes. So in order to get there, we're going to dial in flight level 180, 18,000 feet. Done. So the next thing we're going to do is start up the APU and to inform the ground crew that the aircraft is going to start up engines soon, and so that people get out of the dangerous hazardous areas. Turn on beacon as well. Turn on the APU bleed. Nav and logo is not necessarily required, but I'm just going to do that. And down here we can see the progress of the APU. And once the APU gen, this all goes green and it says APU available, we can switch to APU power. Right, APU is now available. And we're going to turn off external power. And the aircraft is automatically going to be switching to APU generator. We're going to leave the packs as they are right now. They're on, and when they're off, they indicate off, like now. In fact, we could leave them off right now. Set econ flow to on economy. So this might give a little bit more performance. I'm not very sure if that is really required or not. We'll just do it this way now. So this is where we are. We're going to be wanting to go on this runway. And by the looks of it, we're not going to be needing a pushback here. So I might as well just start up the engines. So we're going to set the ignition to start, and then we're going to set the engine number 2 to start up. And we can see over here N2 is coming up. So our QNH is the barometric pressure, which is currently 1011 at Palma de Mallorca. We need to set that too. So engine number 2 looks like a good start. Starting engine number 1. So that short flickering was the aircraft automatically switching from APU generator to main engine generators. And that means I can now turn off the APU bleed and turn off the APU. Since the weather is not bad right now, and not wet, we won't have to leave the ignition on start. So we switch back to normal. We're not going to be flying online, so we wouldn't in this case really need a radio. But for the sake of having one, we'll just turn it on. So the next thing you could do now is to check whether your control surfaces are all responding the way they should be. So this is going to be, you can see the joystick here. Full left, full right, full up, down, and the rudders. Full left, full right, looks operational. Next thing, of course, we don't want to forget, flaps 1. And you can observe, yes, the flaps are coming out. So now the next thing would be to set the auto brakes to maximum in case of a rejected takeoff. This is the ECAM memo, I believe. And it's there to inform the pilot about steps they still need to check or go through. So the next thing would be to inform the cabin that we're about to depart. Spoilers, we need to arm the spoilers also in case of a rejected takeoff, and to do so we just pull up the lever until you see that white ring. When you see the white ring, the spoilers are armed. Next thing, make sure takeoff config is okay. Pressing this button will check the takeoff configuration, and if everything is normal, it'll go green. And the fact that we have no blue items in ECAM memo is a good thing and a requirement, as far as I know. Right, we're going to be taxiing So we set taxi lights on, strobe to the auto position, one-way turn off lights on, parking brake off. I don't know what that was. Looks like I was stuck on something. So next, turn right. Now we could take either of these two. That's really up to either what ATC says. It would be hotel 1, holding point 1 and holding point 2. Or a personal preference. So this is the point at which we would prepare the aircraft for takeoff, and that would be Squawk Charlie, means to enable TARA mode on the transponder. Then additionally landing lights on and taxi light to take off, strobes on. Now, if ATC hadn't called us or has not called us yet, then we would be calling ATC and telling them Lufthansa 141 ready for departure. We don't have ATC now, so that doesn't matter. So this particular checklist requires Seat belts off and then on again. Packs are off. Okay. So throttles 50%. Stabilized, you can see that here. Start chronometer and toga thrust. Right, you can see on the screen it says LEPA climb, LVR climb right now, or LVR CLB, and that means pull back on the throttles to this detent. And now that display has changed to throttle climb. That's definitely one thing we want to do. Now we're climbing above that S, which is the speed for the flaps. So we're going to pull down the flaps now. We can disarm the speed brakes again. Turn on the packs. Air conditioning so that nobody suffocates in the cabin and or any of the passengers, right? Runway turn-off lights off. Same thing for the taxi lights. Contact ADC, Lufthansa 141 airborne. Climbing through flight to climbing through 5,200 feet. And in this case, we can now soon switch to standard barometric pressure. In fact, I think we can do that right now. Constraints mode for this display that will indicate when there are any constraints such as speed or altitude constraints. And then this one actually says you have to be at 2,000 feet or above at this waypoint. whatever reason, we're going to enable airport mode. Well, there aren't really a whole lot of airports in this area. But nevertheless. Now the next thing would be, in reality, to go to the FMC and create a copy of the active flight plan by selecting the secondary flight plan and then copy active. I'm going to go back to flight plan. Well, let's go back here. Now I have the option to activate the secondary flight plan, which I'm not going to do. So this is for if you need to make modifications to the flight plan or to your current flight. Let's say you get diverted to a different airport, then you can make the modifications in the second flight plan and then just activate the second flight plan, and you'll still have your original flight plan available, just in case you do need to fall back to the original flight plan. So as you can see here, we are still on the departure ESPOR to Alpha. And this indication, this blue arrow, is indicating our top of climb. So ESPOR is where our departure is taking us to. That will be the last waypoint of the departure. See, we're just about reaching our top of climb, our cruise altitude. Right, and at this point, the checklist says to switch the transponder TCAS mode to BLW. So we'll do that. We're not going to be seeing any aircraft here on the transponder or on the display rather, because there are none. We're not flying one right now. So because this is a short flight, the aircraft has already detected, okay, it is going to be an ILS approach. But now to demonstrate something, let's assume that for whatever reason you've enabled approach phase. You can really only enable it by confirming it again. Observe what the speed tape is going to say. Currently it's like a little over 300 knots. And right now the speed has gone to 141 knots. It'll climb to like maybe 240 knots. But this is definitely an undesirable situation right now. So how to get out of here again? We get there by going to the progress, and then you'll see there is no cruise altitude, so we put in 180 again. And voila, our speed setting is back to 300 something, and we're out of approach phase again and back in cruise. The next thing that seems to happen quite frequently is once you've actually hit approach phase, now what? Can't get out of here. Okay, so it seems the TOLUS has fixed that, but the solution would be apparently to hit the clear button, then this line selector, and we're out. No, we're not. We're back in approach phase, so that is not so good. Right, back in cruise. Now let's have a look. Top of descent is this point, right? And that is 50 miles. Oh, it's actually quite a bit more than that. Something like that. Now, one of the things in the Airbus is you can dial in your whatever your final approach altitude. Let's actually have a look at that. And that would be 2,700 feet full intercept. So you can dial in 2,700, which you would actually only do once you get either an instruction from ATC to descend to an altitude, and then they tell you what altitude that is, or when you can see on the ND or in here, 150 miles to go to top of descent. I think we're going to cheat that a little bit now. Jump 100 nautical miles, let's do that. now we're only 46 miles to top of descent, and it is saying enter destination data. So we obviously have entered the runway and so on in the beginning, but what the aircraft is actually expecting is to fill out these values. So the QNH I'm going to be taking from active sky. Temperature at Mallorca is currently 11 degrees. That's pretty cold. The winds are 310 at 3 knots. Then to the approach chart for the minimums. So we're going to be category C. That'll be 224 feet. So over here, this arrow that is pointing down and away from the course is going to be the top of descent. In 34 miles, and yeah, that is pretty much that area. So as I was saying early on, what if you set a lower MCP altitude in a Boeing, or at least in a Boeing 737, then when the top of descent is reached, the aircraft will automatically descend. But in Airbus, you actually have to give the aircraft the instruction to descend now. That means we're going to have to be pushing this button. In this particular aircraft, when you hover over the control, 1 dot means push and 2 dots means pull. So 1 dot means that the aircraft is going to be descending in managed mode, and that means according to the calculated descent path. If I pull the button, then it's going to be descending. I think it is going to be descending in vertical speed. Some value that you can change yourself then if you want to. And usually the manual descent will override given altitude constraints, because air traffic control can allow you to descend lower than some of the charts say, because the air traffic control has the last say about altitudes, and they know the area, so you can under normal circumstances trust their instructions. So we've added all this stuff. Auto brakes I'm going to set to 1 because the runway is fairly long actually. just going to skip that. So you can see top of descent is coming in. If we want to know exactly, it's 12 miles. There are a lot of different opinions about when one should press or initiate the descent. And we're not, some people say within 10 miles of top of descent you can do it. Other people say, like this group for example has frequently told me, at a distance of 2.5 miles. So I don't really know what is true and what isn't. So we now have a little more than 8 miles to go. 7 miles now. Let's just push it. So when that dot appears, the aircraft is telling you that the altitude you dial in is going to be attempted to reach in managed mode. Now because we descended a little bit earlier, 7 miles before, we have this other squiggly line which is going to take us from a 1,000 feet per minute descent to the originally planned and calculated top of descent rate. And a good thing when you're descending is always to keep an eye on this speed tape. There is a magenta colored range in which you need to be. So that means if your speed is increasing, then you need to apply speed brakes as applicable, which will be this guy. And for some of the people out there experimenting with this aircraft, keep your eyes on the instruments if you're unsure, and not out here or here. Look what the aircraft is doing. So you can see here the calculated descent path is coming in. We're basically intercepting it, and once we intercept, you can see the descent rate is now increasing. So this script is saying barometer set local QNH when passing through transition altitude. Yes, that is correct. By the latest when passing through transition altitude, which is 6,000 feet, or by the very latest 5,000, you need to set the local QNH again. But something important to note is when air traffic control gives you an instruction to descend from a flight level, which we currently are at because we're in standard barometric pressure. So our flight level would be 153. If they tell you to descend to an altitude is a unit of feet, then that automatically also implies to you that you are allowed to set the local QNH, and then you're not only allowed to, you should. Right, get those passengers back in their seats. So as you can see, I set an altitude here of 2,700 feet. The aircraft is saying I'm only going to go down to 4,500, right? Flight level By the way, this is actually an incorrect indication in my opinion, because it should be saying 4,500 feet, because we're under transition altitude, but who knows. And as you can see here, the current phase of the aircraft is descent. So if I go to somewhere and go back to perf, it will say DES, descent. And you can also see the actual mode is managed descent. And that means the sink rate is managed as well as the speed that is being used. So at this point we can also see, by the way, we have to be at 4,500 or above. So on this display it is showing correctly in feet, and this one is showing flight level. So over here we have to be at 3,000, not above or below. I'm going to arm those speed brakes. Auto brakes were set to low. Low as in opposed to high. So if you need a bit of eye candy, you can enable the ground radar. In this particular region I don't find that very necessary, although there are a couple of little hills and so on. But that is more important when you're really flying through high mountain areas. So we are coming close to 10,000 feet. The aircraft has already pre-selected a speed of under 250. Well, actually, yeah, it is exactly 250 right now. And you need to know that once you go under 10,000 feet, you are not allowed to fly faster than 250 knots, unless ATC says no speed restriction, speed is yours. And that is rarely the case, but it does happen. So if you don't get any special instructions, your maximum speed is going to be 250. And if it is higher, then you're doing something wrong. So, breaking through 10,000 feet, we're going to enable the landing lights, taxi, runway lights. And let us say, just for the sake, that ATC said, yeah, okay, descend flight level 3,000 or something below transition level, then we are going to enable local QNH now. And that happens to be 1011. So the speed over here, that little green dot, is actually called green dot speed. And it is the speed that the aircraft is recommending later on when we get into the approach phase. Because right now we're still on the arrival. Now, the Airbus normally doesn't require that you enter the radio and navigation information. By the way, here you can see that circle with the capital D in it is the decel point, right? That is the point at which the aircraft is going to manually activate approach phase. But I'm just going to do this myself now. And you'll see the speed has just dropped to something that is well below the recommended speed, the green dot speed. I'm going to turn down the radar range a little bit. And at this point, we can start setting our flaps. I'm going to set flaps 1. By the way, approach phase, what it actually does is it allows the aircraft speed to adapt to your flap settings, right? So you basically control the speed by setting the flaps. However, of course, you have to make sure that you're not within the red ranges, right? The next flap setting I can do is when I get down to 200. So if I want to do so, I'm going to have to kick in the speed brakes. And I'm going to enable landing system now. You can see the speed is reducing due to the speed brakes. So in a real flight, pilots would actually be managing their speed manually. Let's do that. We're going to be setting a speed of 200. Let's say 180. So the speed is now before the, or below the setting in which I can safely set the next level of flaps. Let's do that. Flaps 2. And start dropping the gear. Speed brakes back to spoilers armed position. Okay, let's start turning down the speed to 160 knots. And keep up that speed until a distance of 4 miles to the runway, which is the middle circle. Set the next level of flaps. that magenta diamond should start moving down towards the center slowly. And yeah, as you can see, it is moving now. So now would be a good time to hit approach on the aircraft to intercept the localizer and glide slope. So we didn't even go to the lock star. We are on the localizer already, as you can see on the horizontal diamond here. Now glide slope star is coming in, meaning we're about to intercept the glide slope. Once it's on, yeah, right. Once it's centered, the aircraft is going to start making use of the glide slope to navigate us down to the runway.
2,500.
Right, glide slope is now active and fully established. And the ECAMs are telling me check cabin, right? So let's inform the cabin crew that we're about to land. And we're gonna go full flaps in a moment. And as mentioned already,
1,000.
In this aircraft you don't disable the autopilot over here. You do it either using the red button or by assigning a command, by mapping a command to your joystick, which will do the same as pressing this button. So minimums is 224. And by then, at the latest, you're going to have to be either in both autopilot enabled mode or manual. We're going to start going for manual any moment. The difference is if I tick this one now, this light, warning light, is going to keep flashing until I click it away.
500.
I've now disabled the autopilot using the regular method.
400.
I got a small notification and that's it.
300. 200. 100. 50. 40. 30. 20. Retard. 10. 5.
Normally you'd enable reverse thrust a little bit earlier, but this runway is long enough. stop here. Landing lights off. Taxi is on to taxi. Stroke auto. And transponder standby. And off we go. Oh, by the way, flaps up. Disarm spoilers. Well, I'm not actually supposed to be parking here, but that doesn't bother me right now. And everybody can smoke again. So I hope I explained a couple of things in here well enough to understand. Have a nice day.